It's emphasizing lightness in meditation, a kind of light-hearted approach. Maybe the sense of humor that we often see in Zen teachers and Tibetan Buddhist teachers of mindfulness. Not taking ourselves or reality too seriously is a very good approach in terms of kind of liberating our mind from the kind of egoic patterns that we can get so stuck in. And often meditators are quite serious, and it does depend a bit on what tradition you've been taught in. But it generally probably doesn't really give us an image of something very jolly or very light-hearted. Maybe the laughing Buddhas with the big bellies do. And I think it's partly the way Westerners originally interpreted meditation and contemplation, was that it was often a fairly serious pursuit, and quiet pursuit, silence, all things that maybe have a connotation of seriousness. At the same time, there is this tradition, certainly in Buddhism, that I'm aware of a light-heartedness, not taking it too seriously. And there's even a meditation which is described as sitting like a fool, like the fool from the tarot. Some of you will be familiar with the wisdom of the fool from actually not knowing anything. There's a certain wisdom in not knowing anything and not having any preconceptions and taking everything very lightly. And that is also associated with the beginner's mind, having a very open mind, which is not stuck to any views and receives everything very openly. So in our body, when we prepare ourselves for practice, one of the first things is choosing a posture and establishing that posture, lying down, sitting, standing, or walking. And we often emphasize a kind of a solid rooted base, a good connection with the ground through our feet or our buttocks, or the back of the body if we are lying down. And then when that's established, we can perhaps feel fairly light on that base. So there can be a gentle uprightness in our seated pose. We might imagine our head being drawn up towards the sky by a thin thread. You can imagine our arms and shoulders as light, and let our hands rest lightly on our thighs. And we can hold our intention for our meditation quite lightly. So being okay with however the meditation goes. Being okay with whatever comes into our mind. Not having too many preconceived ideas of how it should be, or if they are there, receiving them lightly. And perhaps approaching them with a sense of humor. If we sit every time to definitely become enlightened or sort out all our psychological problems, that's rather a heavy burden to place on our practice. An intention that is more about being like a fool, just sitting in the midst of everything that goes on in our mind and in our world, looking at it with a beginner's mind, not particularly bothered about understanding any of it or changing any of it, watching it a bit like a fascinated child, curious and open. So you might like to have your eyes open, looking up and out into the world. If the screen is in front of you, you could lower it down a bit or turn away or look beyond it. Even having your gaze slightly up, which is unusual in meditation. You usually look towards the ground or straight ahead at most. And looking up gives us a very different embodiment, a different feeling in our mind body. Perhaps looking around a little too. Perhaps this gentle looking up and looking around, taking in the world, brings us in touch with that embodiment of being a bit like a child. As children, we often seem more open to the marvel and the wonder of the world. And maybe there's something you can perceive now with your eyes or your ears that's quite marvelous. And we can begin to notice our body again. So maybe closing your eyes for a moment if that helps you to notice your body. Noticing your breathing, the lightness of the air coming in and out of the body. How easy it is to breathe. And then we'll come up to standing. And take a little bit of time to mobilize your feet or rub your knees. Change my angles a little bit. So as we come to standing, again, it's useful to initially feel the connection to the ground. Maybe bend and straighten the knees a few times to get that sense of being a little bit firmly stuck to the ground. So we have a little certainty there. The ground is there. And And then we can come up onto the ball of one foot and circle our ankle. So we can feel the landscape, the structure of the ball of the foot being in two parts, the big toe side and the little toe side. Going in each direction. You can change direction whenever you feel like, so that can be part of lightness. Taking things a bit as they come, being spontaneous, not too stuck to a certain way of doing things. Noticing how our toes feel. Do our toes feel okay with this movement? Do they feel a little stiff? So be gentle if you've got any pain in your toes, ankle joint. And then before doing the other side, we can notice how each foot and ankle feels, the one that you've worked on and the one that you haven't yet. For me, the one that I've worked on actually feels a bit lighter. The other one feels a bit more like a sort of dead weight on the floor, even though my weight is fairly equally balanced. It already feels different. And then we can do the same movement on the other foot. And maybe your other foot feels quite different to the first one you worked with. Noticing how your toes are. And then planting that foot firmly on the ground again. And then having a kind of softness in the knees. So again, kind of lightness is, for me, is sometimes about kind of softening a bit, not being too rigid. Having that sense of ease in the body. I often talk about finding ease, finding the effortless way to do something, or the least effort in doing something. And then we can come to our arms and shoulders. And on the in-breath, bringing our forearms and hands up, and on the out-breath, bringing them back down. And often it's our perception of something that makes it kind of heavier or lighter. And that can both be physically experienced or emotionally, psychologically. So here, if, for example, I imagine there's a string attached to the back of my hands, like a string puppet, and my hands are gently lifted by someone or something that's managing those strings. And I can feel very light in this movement up, and also quite light in the movement down. Almost as if I'm not doing anything. It's just happening. It's effortless. It's light. And then if I imagine the opposite, so maybe that at the bottom of my hand there's like a strap attached to the floor, which I'm having to stretch like a thick elastic band. Maybe you've used those TheraBands in physiotherapy. I've actually got one somewhere. Where is it? So if I imagine there's something like this, I'm pulling up, but I'm really just only imagining it. That will already, just by changing the way I'm imagining something, change the movement for me. See if you can Imagine something like that. You're pulling on a resistance band and slowly coming back down without letting it pull you down fast. And then we can go back to imagining lightness, and that something is helping us with this movement rather than resisting. So letting go of the idea of a resistance band, coming back to the idea of lightness. There's some assistance, or maybe that our hands and forearms are light like helium balloons. And maybe that invites us to make the movement a bit bigger, to go up higher. Maybe imagining we're becoming so light that it's not just our arms that are light or that are being assisted in this movement by invisible threads, but that our whole body could come up a little bit as if gravity no longer exists. Perhaps there's a little movement forwards onto the balls of the feet and the heels coming up a little bit. And you can take your gaze up again as well. So when we go up, looking up, back down. Noticing that embodiment of lightness. And when we next come down, we can stop in this normal standing again. So our feet are still firmly on the ground. Presumably you haven't suddenly mastered the art of levitation. Congratulations if you did. In that sense, yeah, we're still on the ground. The law of gravity still exists. But maybe we feel a little lighter in our own being. And the other way of promoting a bit of lightness is to let things go. So we often hold on to things physically or mentally or both, probably a bit of both, that don't really serve us. So that can be the worry or the repetitive thought or the trying to work something out, justifying anger or irritation about something, all these different ways of holding on to things, not being able to let them go. And it might seem quite minor, and there's a story often used in Buddhism that if you hold a bottle of water, or a glass of water, it doesn't feel very heavy. It's not even full, this one, so it's maybe 3/4 of a pint in there or something like that. It doesn't feel very heavy. However, if I had to sort of hold it up all day long, I wasn't allowed to put it down, it would soon become really quite tiring. So that analogy is often used, that if we're mentally really holding on to something, we're unable to ever put it down, and that becomes very tiring, takes up a lot of energy. So we can practice a bit of letting go as well. And whilst I'm here, I'll have a sip of water. So we might have a sense of sometimes holding on to some mental stuff. It could even also be views. I've noticed in the current political discussions, people are taking position in the whole debate about Black Lives Matter, and obviously we've had lots of things in the recent years. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID. People have had very strong opinions, and sometimes like really holding on to those positions and arguing, debating, social media, etc. Can make us really quite heavy and serious and uptight. So maybe it's helpful to let go of something like that from time to time. Um, Maybe there's something else in your life you're aware you're sort of struggling a bit with that you'd like to put down. It can be things like perfectionism. If you have a perfectionist streak, very helpful to let that go from time to time. Or anything else that makes us a bit heavy, that tends to suck us down a bit. In the words of Aldous Huxley's quote, there's quicksand all around us. And the metaphor of quicksand, the things that pull us down, that draw us into heaviness, mental heaviness, physical heaviness. Physically, I feel myself going like that. So if I think of my own habits around that, I start to go down and collapse. So how can we kind of maybe go fully into that letting go? So maybe going into a forward bend, breathing out, letting go of whatever we want to put down. Maybe put down these little burdens that we create, little or big burdens we create in our own head, in our own mind. Breathing out, letting go of our head. Really placing this thing or this habit down onto the ground. And then as we come back up, we can come back to this idea of lightness. Feeling light as we come up, maybe coming onto tiptoes for a moment. Light again. So you might do this a few times, putting down different bits of baggage. If you have any different bits of baggage you would like to put down, forward bending, breathing out, intention of letting go of seriousness, perfectionism, the need to be right, the need to change the world, whatever it is. Putting those things down, and you come back up, imagining yourself as very light, as if you could levitate, floating up. Maybe going back down again, forward bend, and down. Let's finish this little sequence by coming up into the light movement. Your arms could be up or a bit lower down, and just your fingers up. It doesn't matter, just work with how your body is. Maybe tiptoes, or maybe one foot on a tiptoe and the other one down if your balance isn't so great. Looking up. And then releasing. So the other embodiment of lightness is the shaking off. So again, we often do that. And in my own life, I quite regularly use the image of water sliding off a duck's back. So if I'm sort of aware that, for example, I take something personally, like feedback or grumpiness from another person, which may have nothing to do with me, but it feels a bit awkward or something like that. I often, because I might not do this in that moment, but I often imagine that it can just slide off me like water off a duck's back. Again, I might breathe out and just feel my feet on the ground and imagine my upper body is very light. So aware of that downward and upward direction. And that helped me to take it less personally. So I think that's often for me a way into getting heavy about stuff as well, that I might take it very personally and I see it as my responsibility when quite often it really isn't. It isn't necessarily anything to do with me. Shaking off, and imagine things can slide off us like water off a duck's back. So let's come back to the screen briefly to have a little reflection on where some of the things I've mentioned, or where this idea of lightening up might be helpful in our lives. So I'll pause the recording for this sharing. So yeah, creating a sense or a felt sense of space around us. If there's this feeling that we need to take things a bit less personally, or let them slide off us like water off a duck's back, or we're affected by things around us or people around us when we know that's not helpful, this practice can be quite a good way to cope. So we can first find our center, our own center, so we become centered. So often if we're affected by others or circumstances, we're kind of pulled mentally and maybe also physically into something. We're pulled into an argument, the fight response, maybe going forwards, or we're going into flight response, going backwards, or avoiding, collapsing. We go into these different directions in response to something, when actually it would be helpful to keep our own center. So in standing or sitting, we can physically center ourselves, so we're not leaning forwards, we're not leaning backwards, we're not leaning sideways. So we can explore these 4 directions to find our center. So sometimes I do a little rotation, which I then make smaller and smaller until I feel, yeah, I'm sitting on my sitting bones, or I'm standing on my feet in a way that's centered. And then I can take a couple of breaths where I focus on the downward connection, down into the earth. I might imagine that I'm actually breathing out through the soles of my feet into the ground, or through my sitting bones towards the ground. And then to help myself to be upright, to not go into a collapse response, but to stay upright. I can also take a couple of breaths, and on the out breath, imagining I'm breathing out through the crown of my head. And then to create a sense of space around me, I can take a couple of breaths and imagine I'm breathing out through the front of my body, the navel or the heart might be a good place, the heart center, to imagine we're breathing out from, towards the front. And then a couple of out breaths, imagining breathing out through our back into the backward direction. maybe from between the shoulder blades or the small of the lower back. And then taking our awareness to our side ribs, left and right. Feeling the side ribs expand on the in-breath. And then as you breathe out, imagine breathing out in the left and right directions. As if you're breathing out through the gaps between your ribs on the side of your body. And then the next couple of breaths, imagining that you can breathe out in all those 6 directions. And you might like to add the visualization of light. So it might help to simply imagine you're breathing out a little bit through all your pores in the form of light, and that these out breaths in all these directions, forwards, backwards, sideways, up and down, create like a globe or a halo of light around you. So breathing in, sensing your whole body upright and centered, and then exhaling in all directions, creating like a bubble or a sphere of light around us, from on the front, on the back, each side of the body, and up and down. And then we could perhaps, once we've done that, be a little more objective and helpfully distanced psychologically from whatever's going on around us that we don't wish to take personally or wish to take responsibility for, whilst still being present with it. So as you prepare, I'll read some bits of this Aldous Huxley quote that this work is inspired by today. And it describes quite nicely this idea of bringing a lightness or a sense of humor to things, and putting the stuff down that we perhaps choose to hold on to when we really don't have to. So Aldous Huxley, and it is from Ireland by Aldous Huxley. It's dark because you are trying too hard. Lightly, child, lightly. Learn to do everything lightly. Yes, feel lightly even though you're feeling deeply. Just lightly let things happen and lightly cope with them. So throw away your baggage and go forward. There are quicksands all about you, sucking at your feet, trying to suck you down into fear and self-pity and despair. That's why you must walk so lightly. Lightly, my darling, on tiptoes and no luggage, not even a sponge bag, completely unencumbered. So as we go into relaxation, resting, and this can sometimes help with getting a good night's sleep too, it's helpful to put the things down that maybe have kept us occupied during the day, especially spending a lot of time at home or working from home. It might be good to put everything away or remove it from your sleeping area or your relaxation area, And mentally, we can imagine doing this. We can imagine putting everything that we don't want to take with us or hold on to or carry right now, be weighed down by right now, in a box or a bag or a suitcase. And we can imagine putting it outside the door, or even throwing it away if you want to let go of it permanently. Sometimes it's just leaving it till tomorrow. Putting stuff down, leaving it aside, parking it. And on the out breath, emphasizing that intention. I don't need to deal with this right now. I don't need to carry it. I don't need to hold it. And we can allow our body's weight, to be carried by the earth. So we're putting that down too. So by allowing ourselves to kind of be heavy on the earth or on our seat, we can feel lighter. And then we can bring an image of lightness into our mind. Perhaps a bird flying high in the air. Connecting our mind to how light birds seem to be, or a butterfly. A feather floating in the air. Dandelion seeds being blown into the air. And perhaps again also the image of light itself, sunlight, rainbow light. And lots of expressions that relate to kind of mental freedom, the word enlightenment, or seeing the light, the greeting or the wish, love and light. We can wish that for ourselves. May I be able to tread lightly in my own life and in the world today. May I be able to meet obstacles lightly. And we can extend that wish to others, perhaps to people close to us that we know maybe are struggling or ill. May they be able to tread lightly. And perhaps a wish for the wider community and humanity. In times that may seem quite heavy to many. May there be light, may there be lightness, so that the world is not sucked down into the quicksand of despair. May lightness prevail. And perhaps again imagining a sphere of light around your own body in all directions. Breathing out light in all directions from your body. And then imagining light, a sphere of light around the whole of the planet. Wishing for the whole earth and all creatures on it and the whole of nature to be well. And when you come to opening your eyes, if they've been closed, come to move your body, you can emphasize lightness again, maybe by noticing the light in the room. Imagining your body as you stretch as being light or supported in your arm raised by invisible threads. And we can bring that into our daily life as well by noticing and taking in the good, which is a practice we've done quite a lot of, gratitude practice. What can we appreciate? Noticing light things instead of the dark things, or at least bringing balance between light and dark in terms of what we pay attention to. And perhaps noticing birds in the sky and butterflies in the air, and walking lightly with a spring in our step. I'm trying to relearn how to skip, for example, which is a bit challenging. And a lot of us grown-ups have forgotten how to skip. So just taking a little jump up and down every now and again, skipping, jumping over something, walking on tiptoes, little ways of embodying Aldous Huxley's advice. So it can be a lot of fun too. Excellent. Wishing you much lightness in the coming days and weeks.